This episode is sponsored by Dunfermline and West Fife Local Tourism Association and Fife Tourism Partnership, and is part of the campaign Our Story, Yours to Explore. To find out more about the fascinating stories of Dunfermline and West Fife, head to ebook.dunfermline.com. Hello there, and welcome to Wild for Scotland, a podcast full of inspiring stories from Scotland. I'm your host, Kathi Kamleitner. Wild for Scotland helps you connect with Scotland and dream about future adventures. I'll tell you immersive stories to whisk you away, share some of my top tips for your own Scotland trip, and introduce you to inspiring locals and their stories. So lean back and enjoy. Let's travel to Scotland. If you follow my Scotland travel updates on Instagram, at WatchMeSee by the way, you may remember that last month I spent 3 days exploring Dunfermline and West Fife, an area on the east coast of Scotland, just a stone's throw north of Edinburgh. Today I'm telling you a story about that journey, and I'll be sharing some of the conversations I had with locals along the way. We begin in Dunfermline, a royal borough from the Middle Ages, and since 2022, Scotland's 8th city. It was my home base for this trip, and a perfect place to start exploring the area. But my adventures went way beyond the medieval heritage quarter and the green spaces of the city, and it wasn't hard for me to discover postcard villages, long-distance hiking paths, sandy beaches, and unique cultural heritage sites, all within easy reach and well connected by bus and train. I hope you feel inspired by all of this and more. This is Yours to Explore. When you think about Scotland, where does your mind go? Maybe it wanders to the idyllic glens framed by rugged mountains, or to remote coastlines with dramatic cliffs and sandy beaches. Maybe you think of the wildlife, elusive red squirrels, soaring eagles, or humorous puffins, haggis and whiskey, Jacobites and Highlanders, the poetry of Robert Burns. Scotland is known for many things. But really, to understand Scotland, you have to go back in time and explore its history and tales of legendary kings and queens. That's where we'll start our journey today. I'm in Dunfermline, Scotland's ancient capital, where 1,000 years ago, King Malcolm III married his Queen Margaret. For centuries, Dunfermline was a stronghold of power, a royal borough from the 1120s, and a bustling commercial centre that influenced all parts of Scottish life, from religion and politics to craftsmanship and technical innovation. Today, it is a small city, proud of its heritage. My walk through the Heritage Quarter begins on the High Street. Most of the medieval buildings were destroyed in a big fire in 1622, so it's primarily the layout of the city that survived the passage of time. The Market Cross marks the former centre of activity, and closest lanes and wynds branch off left and right, forming narrow passageways. I walk down one of them and emerge in front of a bright pink building. Abbot House is Dunfermline's oldest house, dating back to the 16th century. It was built for the abbot of Dunfermline Abbey, but over the centuries it has been extended and served many purposes, from iron forge to doctor's surgery. Behind, a small walled garden is on the cusp of awakening. Bees fly from blossom to blossom, spreading life and the arrival of spring. I walk through the gates and towards the new Abbey church. It was built in the 19th century, replacing part of a much older abbey whose nave still stands solid in the background. The tower is adorned by a crown carved from stone and 4 words written on each side. King Robert the Bruce. The king that led Scotland during the First War of Scottish Independence, died a hero and was buried here at Dunfermline Abbey, just like many other monarchs throughout the centuries. I enter the nave of the old abbey church. My steps echo in the ancient hall, framed by skillfully carved stone columns. A gateway connects it to the new abbey church, and there, beneath the pulpit, lie the remains of the legendary king. But kings and queens are not the only ones who've left a legacy for Dunfermline. Just down the hill from the abbey, I find myself at the Andrew Carnegie Birthplace Museum. He is, without a doubt, Dunfermline's most famous son, and the museum tells his story, from his modest upbringing in a small cottage to his career as a businessman in America, and the legacy he left behind. Carnegie grew up in modest circumstances. The son of a weaver whose business fell victim to the fast pace of progress. The family was forced to emigrate to America, where in a case of irony, Carnegie made a fortune in the Industrial Revolution. After the sale of his steel company, he was the wealthiest man in America, but the money was not something he wanted to hold on to. I speak with Natalia, a museum assistant here at the museum, and she tells me about Carnegie's interest in philanthropy.
And for people to enjoy, because he was remarkable, he was one of the kind, and not a lot of people are happy to put 90% of all the wealth that they acquired after he acquired after selling his shares in Steel Corporation. So not everyone is happy to put 90% into the fund to do philanthropy, to build libraries, to fund science projects, to pay people's pensions, and so many, many things. They were paid from the fund that Andrew Carnegie funded there. Because he truly believed that there are people who have ability and talent to acquire money, earn money, with the help of their employees and the workers, but their sacred duty is not to keep money for themselves. The sacred duty is to distribute it to the benefit of society, of the future humanity. And that's the main motto of his Gospel of Wealth was, the man who dies rich dies disgrace. And he truly followed to this motto. And it was not something that he woke up in the end of his life. It's something he truly believed even when he was in his middle 30s, when he wrote a letter to himself that you cannot keep all the money that you earned. It's not fair, because the money that were earned with the help of society need to go back to the society and do some good to it. And the fact that he really managed to do that, he was true to himself, he had chance to do that, and it was not just words, he actually did it. And that's probably, I think, the most fascinating part of his character. So, and that's why we're here in the museum.
Carnegie endowed Dunfermline with many treasures and gifts. In 1902, he bought Pittencrieff Park and gifted it to the city. He also funded the building of public swimming baths, an Art Deco theatre, a music institute, and a technical college. Arguably his biggest contribution, though, was the funding of the first Carnegie Library, which is still in place today. He returned to the city himself with his mother Margaret, so she could lay the foundation stone. It is here that I meet Donna Dewar, one of the cultural services assistants here at Dunfermline Carnegie Library and Galleries. I ask her what visitors can expect when they come here.
So we began with the world's first Carnegie Library. The original building opened in 1883. We've still got a lot of the original shelving details like fireplaces and stuff. And then in 2017, we opened this wonderful extension that incorporated a museum. We've covered various themes on the history of Dunfermline. We identified the important themes we thought that the town should celebrate. So we start with Dunfermline's industries, we move on to home life, We move on to transport, leisure and recreation, a bit about wartime Dunfermline, and then its rich royal history.
And then the building itself is obviously remarkable. It's very different than many other museum buildings maybe out there or libraries. So can you tell us a bit about what it looks like and what it feels like to be inside?
It's a wonderful juxtaposition of old and new. We've got the original outside wall of the old building inside the new extension. We've got a lovely glass roof, so it's a bright, airy space, balconies all around, so there's a real buzz around the place.
And the beautiful windows, of course, as well, that reveal views of the city's landmarks and the different historic buildings here in the Heritage Quarter as well. You said it's like framing history.
Yeah, because we've got so many beautiful buildings around us, they literally do look like a picture. There's small ones, there's big ones, and they're all perfectly suited to what's in the view.
So a gallery on all sides of the
Absolutely.
building. Really.
Inside and out.
What makes Dunfermline so special to you, or what is one of your favourite things about Dunfermline as someone who lives and works here?
I think there's some absolutely beautiful architecture, and sometimes you don't appreciate it from street level, and it's actually when you look out the windows here and you can see across the Abbey graveyard from a higher perspective. I love architecture and I love stonemasonry, so even if you go along to the city chambers, it's got amazing crests, royal crests, which they think a lot of them were taken from an ancient royal building. There's just not the history to show which. Lovely, lovely buildings. I think the people are really proud of the town, and I think it's a very welcoming place.
Is there anything you wish that people knew about Dunfermline or West Fife? Anything you want to give them along on the way to inspire them to come and visit?
I just think it's a fabulous base, not just for being in Dunfermline itself. There's a great bus network, there's trains, you're close to Edinburgh, and there's just so much to see. There's parks.
Inspired by Donna's advice, I find myself sitting at Dunfermline bus station the next morning. I left my car at home deliberately to see how easy it would be to explore the region by public transport. My bus arrives and I jump on. Within a few minutes, we've left the bustling city behind and trundle through the countryside. The road is framed by trees and hedges, daffodils bloom at their base. And as we pass through the maze of villages, the shimmering water of the Firth of Forth comes into view. I get off in Kouros, a village filled with picturesque lanes and chocolate box cottages. As I wander through the historic streets of this royal borough, it's hard to believe that just over 100 years ago, it was almost demolished. Luckily, the National Trust for Scotland took an interest in the Golden Palace at the centre of the village. And since it took over ownership in 1932, they've carefully restored many of the buildings here. It's fair to say that all that work has paid off, and Kouros is without a doubt one of the prettiest villages in West Fife. The man responsible for the wealth of this village was George Bruce. He made a fortune with his coal mines out in the estuary and built a prospering community for his workers. Today, the village is particularly popular among Outlander fans who flock here to see the Market Cross, the palace, and the Hanging Gardens, which were all used as sets on the show. But even without that reference, Kouros is a feast for the senses. I begin my walk near the townhouse and make my way up a narrow cobbled street. The stones are difficult to walk on, and I have to watch my every step. The buildings have whitewashed walls and red pan-tile roofs, a hint at the prolific trade relationship between this part of Fife and the ports of the Netherlands. Ships that exported coal and limestone over to the European mainland had to be weighed down for their return journey, and these pan-tiles were the cheapest cargo around. So while the rest of Scotland built their roofs with slate, these red roofs became the latest fashion in Fife. I reached the Market Cross, which is topped, like many market crosses in Scotland, by a unicorn standing on its hind legs. There is a row of colourful cottages and lanes branching off in different directions. The jewel in the village, though, is without a doubt George Bruce's home, Kouros Palace. Its golden colour is visible from far and wide, so that no one sailing on the Firth of Forth would have had any doubt about who's in charge of these lands. I follow a tour guide from chamber to chamber and listen as she tells stories about the owners of the house, the unique decorations, and her encounters with ghosts from the past.
I had kind of a funny experience a few years ago. Well, it wasn't really funny, it's expensive. The fire alarm kept going off, and every week it went off. And I think the local papers reported, it came a bit of a story, Curtis Palace, the ghosts were playing up. So we got somebody to come through from the fire service, and he went all through the building. He said, electrics are fine, can't understand it, but something in this room is triggering it. I thought, right, okay, we've gone through all the sensible ideas. What are we doing that he doesn't like? So we thought, okay, at night time we are shutting, I think it was this door. And we thought, maybe he doesn't like that. Maybe he likes to get out and wander about. So we said, right, okay, tell you what we'll do, we'll leave the door open, which is his bedroom door. We'll leave the door open. So we said, right, night, George, we've left your door open. Please behave. Don't set the alarm off. Never went off ever again.
Oh, that's wild.
So if you've got a ghost, be nice to them.
Yes.
It definitely works.
They're people too.
Our tour ends in the Hanging Gardens, a terraced garden behind the palace, bursting with flowers, shrubs and herbs. Chickens roam the orchard, and every plant that grows here has either a medicinal or a culinary purpose. The paths are lined with broken shells from the coast, and as I climb higher, the shimmering water comes back into view, calling me closer, away from the land. Intrigued, I make my way to the waterfront and follow a paved path, separated from the water only by a fence and the train tracks. The tide is out, and the receding water reveals a muddy estuary. Whenever the sun breaks through the clouds, the shiny wet surface bounces the light back into the sky, acting like a giant mirror on the exposed sea floor. The trail I'm following is the Fife coastal path. It runs all along the coast of Fife, from Kincardine west of here to Newborough up north on the Tay shore. I'm walking the 7 miles from Couros to Limekilns, a section that is bursting with local history and fascinating stories. To hear some of them, I'm joined by Ewan Thomas, an Access and Recreation Officer with the Fife Coast and Countryside Trust. His job is to encourage people to access paths and beauty spots in Fife and show them how to do it responsibly. He often guides walks on the coastal path, and I ask him how this landscape relates to the social history of the region.
There's quite significant coal deposits in Fife, and there's certain stretches along the coast where you'll still find coal coming up from seams just under the sea, so you get coal seams. And a lot of the villages around the west and central Fife as well were based around individual mines or individual groups of mines, and they certainly develop their own identities, a lot of these places. I've heard all sorts of stories about, staunch communists and, very distinct places. In fact, there's one place, Dunfermline, where they've got Gagarin Way. But the mining very much shaped the communities and still does shape the communities, even all the kind of physical infrastructures almost disappeared. Most places now you would hardly know that mines had existed here, but it's very much still within the communities. Mining communities tended to be kind of self-supporting communities and tended to be quite tight communities as well. But the nature of the work meant the dangers and whatever did force people to become a lot closer than perhaps they would do if they worked in offices or something like that. And this whole stretch that we're walking now is very much shaped by coal. As we head towards Limekilns, you've got they use the coal for producing the lime there. As the bits that you've passed behind already, so I think I mentioned just outside Couros was Longanet Power Station, which was one of the biggest coal-fired power stations in Europe. And we've still got the remnants of their ash lagoons that are left at Preston Island. So there's still coal still shapes the environment here.
Absolutely.
I think this part of the coast path is very much more about, I think, the social aspects of Fife, be it the darker parts with, persecutions of witches, but also the mining communities, the coastal communities along here. It's very much, a social part of the route. And then as you go on further, it's more about the wildlife. Yeah. But we've got a really nice mix here with, mud flats here. So this is a nature reserve here, recognised for the waterfowl that overwinter here. It's not sort of perhaps conventionally beautiful in the way that you would class the Highlands or something like that. But it certainly, I find Fife is somewhere that bears a closer look. When you start looking at the detail, you start finding little corners and places that are less visited. And there's something to be said for that. Without having to go very far,
absolutely,
I can find, places like this, really.
I know, I can kind of see what you mean. There's definitely places in Scotland that look more dramatic, look wilder, with big mountains and a few people. Whereas here, as we see along the coast, kind of trying to describe our current view, both on this side and across the water. There's one settlement, one village, one town after the other. And you can really tell that a lot of it is built up and there's a lot of people who live in this area. But in between us and, I guess, the other side of the Forth, there's this big open bay. We can see water in the Forth in the distance. But right here where we are, it's low tide and there's this vast plain of silty, seaweedy ground with the sky just perfectly reflecting in that little bit of water that is left behind by the tide. That's always my favourite thing. It looks like a little mirror all over, not a little mirror, a big mirror all over the ground. And you can hear, of course you can hear the road a little bit and the people walking, but you can hear the birds, you can hear all the little insects in the seaweed jumping around and crawling, almost like a crackling, exactly. There is a lot of beauty, I think, in that. You don't have to go very far for this.
And I think actually the almost inhospitable nature of the mud flats is to its benefit, because it means people tend not to come here. They can't go out and play on it as you can on the sand. So it's very much an environment for the wildlife. We can't get on there in any way. The mud's a couple of metres deep or more in some places.
So in a way, it's almost like a tall mountain.
Yes, yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's probably more inhospitable in some respects.
Luckily, though, the coast itself is very hospitable to people walking the coastal path. And when I reach Limekilns a few hours later, it doesn't take long to find a cosy pub and a well-deserved dram. The next day, I find myself walking along the Fife coastal path again. Only this time, I'm exploring a village east of Dunfermline, Aberdour. From the train station, I wander down to the ruins of Aberdour Castle. Since the 1100s, it has been the home of noble families and has been extended and upgraded over the centuries. The earliest tower house has long collapsed, but the elegant extension still stands solid today. Facing south towards the coast is a terraced garden with beehives and an orchard, and far from the main house lies a historic ducat that was once home to 600 pigeons. From the castle, I stroll through the walled garden, past St. Fillan's Church, and along a footpath following a signpost for Silver Sands. The sandy beach is bustling with families, kids playing in the shallows and parents preparing picnics in the shade of pop-up tents. Someone is paddling a kayak and dogs bark at the endlessly lapping breaking of waves. I continue walking, exploring the coast on tiny footpaths. Stepping over seaweed-covered rocks that are exposed by the tide, I can see Edinburgh in the distance. The peaks of Arthur's Seat, Castle Rock, and the Pentlands are clearly standing out from the rest. Out east, I can make out the pointy tip of Berwick Law near North Berwick, and on the horizon, I recognise the outline of the Isle of May. I sit on the rocks for a little while, listening to the calm movements of the water and letting the sun tickle my nose. Back in the village, I return to the station and take a train to the last stop of my trip.
This is Outlander. This train is for Edinburgh Waverley. The next stop is Dalgety Bay.
My journey began in the footsteps of King Malcolm and St Margaret. Their marriage set Dunfermline and West Fife on a course of national and international significance. Even as Edinburgh became the new capital of Scotland, Dunfermline remained an important player, and people and trade moved between the two cities. From coal miners like George Bruce in Couros to skillful businessmen like Andrew Carnegie of Dunfermline, West Fife is inextricably linked with the technological innovation of the Industrial Revolution. Put the two together, and you get one of the great wonders of Scotland, a means of transporting all those people between Edinburgh and Dunfermline, and a feat of engineering that was second to none at the time it was built. From the train station in North Queensferry, I can already see the tips of the 3 towers that support the Forth Bridge. Designed by the English engineers Sir John Fowler and Sir Benjamin Baker, this cantilever railway bridge was revolutionary when it was completed in 1890. Before the bridge was built, the only way to get across the Firth of Forth was by ferry, and the crossings were treacherous. So many currents crisscrossed the deep waters of the Forth, it was necessary to install a light tower that served as a beacon, ensuring boats had somewhere to aim for. It is here at the waterfront by the light tower that I meet Gary Irvin, a retired engineer, photographer, and one of the volunteers at the small museum on the pier. As we watch train after train rattle across the bridge, I ask him what he finds most intriguing about it.
Wow. It's a bit of a black hole, and that's the fascinating thing about it, because there's so much new that was so much innovative at the time, and yeah, you can see the construction. And if you look at the bridge, there's 3 towers. There's a north and south face of the towers. There's a north and south face of the towers. Now, all these faces had to be built simultaneously from the ground up. Now, as they grew up higher, they had to move cranes up the different points to lift up the pieces to get it higher and higher. And the most intriguing thing about it is that the logistics was done without any computers. It was done with manpower. I think there was about 3,000 people employed, and it was done for a few pounds, relatively speaking.
It's incredible.
Yet another train. Here you are.
But I must admit, even without an engineering background, it is a joy watching the trains roll over the bridge.
24 steps, right?
I climb the light tower to get a better view.
Wow. This is cool.
The characteristic red of the Forth Bridge pops in the low sunlight of the late afternoon. I can hear the grumbling of the trains high up on the tracks. The waves lapping onto the rocky beach below. And the calls of seagulls squabbling over scraps. It still rings in my ears as I board the train back to Dunfermline. Like a soundtrack, over the credits on my journey to the ancient capital and West Fife. hope you enjoyed this story about my trip to Dunfermline and West Fife. There really is a lot to discover here, whether you're looking for a fun day out, a city break, or a relaxing walking holiday on the coastal path. You can dive into the rich heritage of Scotland's ancient capital, explore medieval castles and villages, dig your toes into the sand, and listen to the fascinating stories as told by the locals. One of my favourite things about this trip is that I was able to see so much in just 3 days, and entirely without a car. Not every place in Scotland is this well connected and can offer such a range of experiences. You can find a detailed recap of my journey to Dunfermline and West Fife on my Scotland blog, Watch Me See, and plenty more inspiration for things to do and see in the region on dunfermline.com. As a bonus episode for Patreon subscribers, I'm putting together another story that Ewan shared with me during our walk on the coastal path. It's all about the dark history of the persecution of witches, here in Fife and Scotland as a whole. To get access to this and all past bonus episodes, simply follow the link to support our show and sign up for the Wee Puffling tier. All those links are in the show notes. And with this, I send you off to plan your own trip to Dunfermline and West Fife in the footsteps of monarchs, innovators, and podcasters. We are taking another wee break to work on new episodes and an entire new season for later this year. Follow us on social media at Wild for Scotland for sneak peeks, and if you can't bear the thought of not hearing my voice for a wee while, join our Patreon for monthly bonus episodes, which will continue throughout the summer months. Thank you so much for listening to Wild for Scotland. We love telling stories that are truly inspiring, so if any of our episodes have ever inspired you to visit a certain location, support a sponsor, or change something about the way you look at the world, we'd love to hear from you. Wild for Scotland is part of the Tremula Network, adventure and outdoor podcasts off the beaten path. The show is written and hosted by me, Kathi Kamleitner. Thanks to Fran Turauskis, who's the co-producer and editor and does the sound design. Kirsty Spain and Anesu Matanda Mambingo are supporting the podcast and Tremula Network with social media. Podcast art is by Lizzie Vaughan-Knight, the Tartan Trailburner, and all original music is composed by Bruce Wallace. Until next time, when we travel to a different place in Scotland.